The Google Pixel 2 is arguably the best smartphone camera you could buy for the past year. And with the public release of the new Pixel 3 imminent, we wanted to see if what many consider to be the best smartphone camera got even better on this newer model, and how well it stacked up to the latest and greatest from Apple on the iPhone XS. Of course, we've got a full review of both the new Pixel 3 and 3 XL coming very soon, but before that video went live, we just wanted to do a very quick camera comparison between these two flagships to see just how similar or different they really are. Is the Google Pixel still the camera king of smartphones? Let's find out. Before we take a look at the photo samples, looking at the spec sheets for both phones reveals that both camera systems on these phones are surprisingly similar. Both have 12 megapixel rear shooters with an f1.8 aperture, optical image stabilization, and HDR, but the iPhone has a second 12 megapixel telephoto lens that the Pixel does not. Switching to the front is where we see a bit more of a difference between these two phones. The iPhone has a standard lens with a 7 megapixel sensor, while the Pixel's got dual front-facing lenses with 8 megapixel sensors in each of them, with one of those lenses being a wide-angle field of view, while the other is just a regular old standard lens. Don't get too caught up on spec sheets though. The big difference here between these phones is gonna lie within the software, really the difference between how the Pixel handles photo processing versus how Apple handles it on the iPhone XS. Of course, Google prides itself on its advanced machine learning, its software wizardry, and pixel core processing that has really given the Pixel photos the edge, but Apple has done a lot of work recently to catch up, and with the introduction of Smart HDR on the new XS, the photos are closer than ever in many scenarios. Let's take a look at some of these samples. There is a lot to unpack from these photos, and these first few shots are very close, nearly identical on both phones. This just goes to show that in ideal conditions with good light, both phones can produce really good results, though the iPhone continues to typically produce warmer tones in most photos. But this photo in particular is where we start to notice a difference between these two phones. You can see a clear difference between the XS and the Pixel 3 when it comes to sharpness. The iPhone is able to achieve the shallow depth of field, while the Pixel photo sharpens every part of the image, almost to the point where it looks a little bit over-sharpened, losing that macro shallow depth of field effect. One of the iPhone's greatest strengths and weaknesses in the new XS is the addition of this new Smart HDR feature. And essentially the iPhone takes a series of over and underexposed photos, combines them together to produce photos with more details in both the highlights and the shadows. And the Pixel does this as well, but the iPhone tends to do it a little bit more aggressively. Here's an example of that. The addition of that Smart HDR brightens up the shadows and shows off way more details in the vines than compared to the Pixel 3 that keeps those vines a bit darker, but a little bit more true to life. Smart HDR is great, but sometimes you want to see some shadows in your photos. In this example of this portrait mode shot, you can see the XS's Smart HDR working to brighten up the image, whereas the Pixel 3 leaves the shadows, adding a bit of contrast, which looks a little bit better. This is also a great example of portrait mode on both the phones. With a lot of light, both do a very good job of cutting out your subject from the background and separating those two. You'll notice the Pixel 3 shot is sharper, has more contrast, and doesn't leave the skin tone as warm as on the iPhone XS. And here's an example of where the Smart HDR on the iPhone can be a little bit too much. Here's a low light photo in our studio that looks a little bit more accurate on the Pixel, whereas the iPhone tries to brighten up the dark areas, resulting in a much noisier, less realistic photo. And jumping back to portrait mode for a second, we can see that in some cases, especially in tricky situations, the iPhone's second telephoto lens really does help portrait mode be more accurate and provide some additional depth data that's going to be needed. Both shots look pretty good, though not only does the iPhone give more detail in Matt's hair, as you can see, but also does a much better job of separating him from the background. And the Pixel struggles here. You can see the top left corner next to Matt didn't get blurred out, though again, the colors are gonna look a little bit more accurate and a little bit more pleasing on the Pixel than on the iPhone. Quickly running through a few more samples here just to kind of show you guys some more photos. Both phones definitely have their strengths and their weaknesses. The Pixel seemed to do a better job with portrait mode in our low light tests, and the super high res zoom makes the image from the Pixel look a little bit more cartoony, but it does have much more detail than on the iPhone, though the iPhone allows you to get just a little bit closer to your subject, and in some cases, the Pixel just takes a much more visually pleasing photo. It retains the detail and the look of this neon sign much better than the XS did, and when it comes to this shot in the car, I prefer the Pixel's image over the iPhone's just because it has a little bit more contrast, a little more saturation, just looks a little bit more visually appealing to me than on the iPhone. That wide angle lens is super convenient to have on the Pixel and produces some good looking group selfies, and same goes for this standard selfie in the car. Obviously, the iPhone is doing some heavy noise reduction here, and it's going to result in some skin smoothing that is a bit much, but the Pixel, although it's a great looking shot and provides a lot of detail, is again almost a little bit too sharp. It's like you're cranking that clarity filter all the way up to 100%, though it does do a good job retaining both shadows and also details out of that rear window that's very sunny. Both phones also have their own individual software tricks, but at the most basic level, I think the iPhone XS and the Pixel 3 are closer now than they ever have been before, and the addition of the Smart HDR on the iPhone brings the iPhone way closer to Pixel 3 level of photos than it has been before. But again, both cameras are going to have their strengths and their weaknesses in different situations. The iPhone XS gives you a lot of detail in your photos, and it's going to produce a really good looking photo with minimal effort, though you're probably still going to want to go in there and edit the photo to get it looking exactly how you want it. The Pixel 3 takes a simply great looking photo with little to no effort on your part, and in many cases in a side-by-side test, it's going to produce shots that look more visually appealing than what you're going to get on the iPhone. Software processing here on the Pixel 3 is good, though at times it can be a little bit too much when it comes to sharpness and clarity and contrast, but because it's software based, I'm sure this is going to continue to get tweaked and refined over time with software updates. Personally, for me, I like to put the least amount of effort into processing and editing my photos after the fact as possible. I just want the phone that I'm going to be able to use to snap a photo and it's going to look good and visually appealing. So for me, the Pixel 3 is going to be my phone of choice, but again, your mileage is going to vary. It's going to depend on what you're looking for in your photos, if you really want to edit it after the fact, but for me, little effort, Pixel 3 is going to be better in my case. And if you guys want to take a look at these photo samples for yourselves, we're going to put a link down below in the description. We've got a bunch of photos on there, including some we didn't show off in this video. So if you really want to take a deep dive and take a look and pixel peep, check out that link down below. And if you guys want to see video samples from these phones and some more comparisons between them, maybe even an all-out versus of the iPhone XS versus the Pixel 3, leave a thumbs up for this video and leave a comment down below letting us know you guys want to see that so we know that's something you guys are interested in. Again, stay tuned for our full Pixel 3 review coming very soon. I am Robert Rosenfeld from Techno Buffalo. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.